Okay, how many out there have seen a pink gorilla? No, I'm serious, a pink gorilla. You know, one of those, one of those big gorillas. Pink. Have any of you seen a pink one? Well, then that means I've got a story for you. Let me tell you what happened to me one night. And I was driving late out in the desert. Oh, it was kind of a spooky night, really. It was real dark. And I got a flat tire. Oh, man, and I didn't even have a spare. I couldn't change it. I seen some lights off into the distance. And sure enough, there was a home out there, so I walked and walked and walked and finally got to the door and... Well, hello, how may I help you? Well, I've got a flat tire and I need a ride or a place to stay one. Oh, well, that's no problem. I can bunk you out in the barn. I said, well, that'd be fine. The old boy grabbed a sleeping bag and said, well, follow me. And we headed on out to the barn out behind his house. We stepped inside the barn, and there was some nice, beautiful straw. And he laid the sleeping bag down on the straw, and he said, well, here you go, son. You can just sleep here tonight. I said, oh, thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate this. And he turned and started to walk away, and then he turned back at me, and he said, hey, son, have you ever seen a pink gorilla? A pink gorilla? No, I can't say that I ever have. And he says, well, why don't you just follow me? So we walked to the back of the barn, toward the back of the barn, and came to these two huge steel doors. And he pulled out his keys from his side of his belt, and he unlocked those steel doors and pulled them open. And I looked inside, and there were steps leading down into the ground. Wow! We started walking down the steps. Oh, man. We got to the bottom of the steps. He pulled his key out, and there was two double doors. Steel double doors. Huge. So he pulled his keys out, and he unlocked them. Click, click. And over in the back I could see huge curtains. So we walked up toward the curtains, and the old boy reached up and he grabbed the drawstring and started pulling the curtains open. And as they opened up, oh, I couldn't believe it. The first time in my life I ever saw a pink gorilla. Unbelievable. Oh, I ran over to the side of the cage and I reached in to touch it, and he grabbed my arm and pulled me back, and he says, don't ever touch a pink gorilla. What? Why? Don't ever touch a pink gorilla. Oh, okay. So we headed back up, closed the steel doors, and he locked it, click, click, and we walked up the steps. There we went all the way up the steps, and he closed the other double doors, and he locked it. I went over and I laid down on the sleeping bag, and he said, well, you have a good night, son. I'll see you in the morning. And he turned to walk away, and would you believe it? His keys fell to the ground. Now, he walked out of the barn. Now, I don't know about you, but my curiosity got the best of me. I had to figure out why you couldn't touch a pink gorilla. So I grabbed those keys and I walked over to the double door and click, click, click. And man, I headed down those steps. And I got down to the bottom of the steps. I unlocked the other double doors. And there it was, the cage in the back. Oh man, I ran over to that cage and I lifted up to the drawstring and I pulled the curtains open. And there it was, the pink gorilla. Oh, I've never seen such a thing. Oh, I got to touch this pink gorilla. So I went over and I stuck my hand inside and I pulled my hand back and I said, I don't know, maybe I better not touch the pink gorilla. No, I better not. So I walked back and I closed the double doors. And I locked them and I walked back up the steps. And I closed the other double doors. And I locked them. And I ran over and I jumped on the straw on the sleeping bag and I put my head back and I laid there for an indefinite amount of time. I could not believe it. Oh man, I have got to touch a pink gorilla. So I got back up and I went and I unlocked the double doors. And I headed down those steps. Man, I'm going to touch me a pink gorilla, and that's all there is to it. I came to the big, huge double doors and unlocked them. And there it was, the curtain in the back. I walked over to the curtain and I boldly pulled the curtain open and I looked at that pink gorilla right in the eyes. And I reached into the cage and I touched him. All of a sudden, that pink gorilla jumped up and grabbed the bars. And he began to bend the bars. I turned and I ran. I ran through the double doors and I grabbed them and I slammed them shut and I locked them and I ran up the steps. I slammed the other double doors and I turned and I locked it. Oh, and I jumped under my sleeping bag. And then I heard, boom! Boom! And all of a sudden, my sleeping bag was ripped off from me. And I looked up at the pink gorilla and I looked in his eyes. And he reached down and he touched me on my shoulder. And he said, "Tag back." I sure hope you enjoyed this. You have a good day.